Ready? What is today? All right, time being 5 o'clock, March 6th, 2024. I'm going to call the Solar Array Task Force to order, and with a quorum of members present. We will move to agenda item number 1, approval of the minutes. Any changes? Move to approve.
I would move to approve the minutes of the January 18th and February 22nd meeting.
Okay. And a second from Paul.
Well, no, Chad, I just want to say I didn't arrive at that meeting until about 4:37.
Okay.
So I don't know if
You were there.
I was there, but I missed the first half hour.
They looked good to me. Can I
Okay.
second? Could I second that, John? Then I guess I'll second it. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, and we'll move on to agenda item number 2, discussion following questions and answer session conducted by the task force of the following: solar engineering and landscaping professionals with regard to their expertise in serving government entities with solar array arrangements. So we have a whole group of people here. QTSN, Clark Dietz, Solar Connection, Heinrichs Prairie Plus. Am I pronouncing that right? Okay. And I guess, I think, who should we have to start the discussion? Paul, maybe you want to start the discussion with Heinrich? Just kind of go over what you guys walked through the last couple days. And
Yeah, so I reached out to Hal with Henrik's Prairie Plus and just asked if he would be willing to come in and answer any questions that the task force may have related to the process of site prep, planting, maintenance, and all other things related to the planting of prairie or native perennials, both on the berm and within the solar array itself. And I don't know,
sorry, yeah.
Hal, if you would like to just speak, what that process might look like.
Is it on now?
Yes.
I would need about 2 hours minimum to cover some of the things. It is a unique thing to do, to start a prairie. People immediately think, well, I've started many lawns, and so seed is seed. This gets very complicated, very doable. If you were in the real estate business and you were looking for help with things, finding values, they would continually say everything depends on where it is. The success on prairie depends totally on preparation. And the most difficult preparation is to seed or plant it on an area that would be referred to as lawn or turf. That will not be what I understand this to be. You'll be working with a pile of dirt, a mound. So the preparation of that can make things simpler. It can also add complications because success is also based on what you have that you're seeding. So my guess is the soils could come from construction projects, maintenance, cleaning ditches out, and so on. And you design a prairie with a future of at least 50 years. And it's all on how you start. So you are going to have to find a company or a business that takes care of all of those types of details. This would be the same if you were doing one in your backyard and it was, you know, something like an acreage type thing as opposed to 100 foot by 100 foot or some such thing like that. So the seed is unique. If you have a background of farming and such, you're very familiar with various seeds and the means that you get it into the dirt. All the seeds in that process are identical in size, so it's very easy to control how you get the right amount in there. Prairie seeds, a big prairie seed, a fairly big prairie seed is what you might find in your kitchen cabinet, poppy seeds. Those are fairly big. I don't know what the amount is per ounce, but prairie seeds, many of them are incredibly tiny. They're sold by the ounce, not by the, well, by the pound as well if you've got a big enough project, but they measure down to quarter ounces. And there are many seeds that are in the thousands of seeds per ounce. And I'm not talking 1 or 2 or 3,000. Many of the seeds are going to be 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000, up to 1,000,000 seeds in an ounce. So you need special equipment that can handle this thing. You can't do the same things as you're seeding your lawn. All that stuff is available for buying, rent, hiring, and so on. I was going to bring a name along, and somebody maybe know her. I only heard of the name less than 2 weeks ago, and it was something like Katie or Christie. She works for the county. She's been here 2 years. She apparently worked with prairies on her previous job near western Wisconsin, where you find more natural prairies. So there would be a person to get additional information and background for whoever is going to be doing the project. I'm sure there's people on staff, my guess is, that take care of your parks and so on, getting grasses seeded, flowers planted, and so on. You probably have a forester, I'm guessing. I don't think you can get through a forestry program at Stevens Point or Madison where you don't have at least 1 or 2 classes that cover prairies. So you may have somebody with a good background already. So preparation would consist of creating the banks in the size that you want it to be, expecting to be 2 to 3 foot high plants on it. But there's a time of the year where they're going to be laying down, so that might have to be taken into account as to how high that is built. Prairies are never fertilized, so you don't have to worry about that sort of thing as you do with other types of lawns and so on. Fertilizer makes it more difficult for prairie plants. 400 years ago, you wouldn't have to have worried about this, but now you do, because that dirt that you bring in, I don't care where it's from, is going to be loaded with seeds, a seed bank, just like your lawn is. It just sits there. And the plants that we tend not to like have the attitude that those seeds will live commonly for 25 years. 5 is a low one. Some live for 100 years, and you plant them and they grow. So you will get something that's going to happen there. And if you pile those banks up, let's say you start next week and say, well, we're going to plant seeds probably in June, that works with your lawn, not your prairie, in Wisconsin anyway. Seed is normally planted in late fall, from early October through November into December, because of stratification. 90% of the prairie seeds have to have stratification. A quick response to that is the same as ginseng. You plant it, and it has to have an amount of time to be cold. Cold means under 50 degrees for most prairie plants. About 10% don't need it. The others might need 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, easily 3 months. Well, you've planted in fall, that takes place in winter. You don't have to do anything about it. If you're doing it in your backyard, you have to do it in a refrigerator, and then you could plant it in summer. But otherwise, they will not grow, 90% of them, until they've had that 2 weeks to 3 months of stratification. And it's done simply by planting it late in the year. It sits there all winter. It makes no difference if it goes below freezing. It just got to be at least below 50. That's going to happen in Wisconsin. And then they start germinating when the soils hit 60. So let's go back to, you put your work in there. You have it all set up how you want it to look. By the time you want to plant in fall, it's going to be green with all the seeds that develop. You have to decide how you want to eliminate it. It can be done by burning, if you have machines that go over it. You can do it by cultivating as small as possible, less than an inch. That turns up more seed. Or you can say, we can spray it once with Roundup, we accept it. I don't put in prairies commercially. I'm not in a business, but I am usually working on at least one prairie from a half acre to an acre every year with people I know who come to me and say, will you help me plant a prairie? I have 26 acres of prairie that I started about a little over 30 years ago with 2 different plantings of 1/8 of an acre. So I have learned an awful lot. So far, any questions I could jump to that would get to questions you do have? I can continue a little more, but go ahead.
I guess my concerns would be, having managed the Holtz Crosley landfill, the construction there, one of the concerns is erosion, and given the fact that you're planting in fall and not looking for germination until spring, what sort of erosion, and I think we could probably break the project down into the paneled or the array area and the berms to address that, but what concerns do you have relative to erosion, and what do you use for minimizing erosion on the berms?
Very simple and very cheap. You get a planter and you simply plant a good crop of oats in it. And you don't buy the oats that came out of the bin, you buy the same oats that the farm is going to buy to plant. It's eliminated as much as possible the seeds in there. Then you could mow it in fall. Obviously, it's going to get killed, but probably not till November, depending on our falls, and who knows what our seasons are anymore. But yes, it's easy to do, and they will root, obviously, as you know, within 10 days. And you plant it good and heavy, and you should have very little erosion. And it's easy to do and doesn't harm anything. And any of those that happen to be alive when the others is seeded, you didn't need to do nothing with it. But just prior to that, you would want to consult with somebody to say, how about if we just mow it really low and then spray it with Roundup to kill, just leave it be, and 10 days later, plant your prairie. So it's an excellent topic to come up with. It is important, and it's easily cured.
Do you have more, John? So you walked around the site with Paul.
Yes.
Do you think think a prairie would go there or would take?
There's not much to interfere with anything other than, it's excellent.
Yeah. And you mentioned 2 to 3 feet high. Is that?
That's what the plants will be. Prairies, 3/4 of my prairie is what Wisconsin would originally had called tall grass prairie. So my grasses in late August through September, I have grasses that are only 2 and 3 feet tall, but I have the stuff that's 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot, some will go to 9 foot. What you would be planting is what we call small grass, short grass prairie, and both the grasses and the flowers, and you have to plant both. You can't put just grass, well, you could put just grass. You can't put just flowers in. The grasses depend on the flowers depend on the grasses to also add support, and prairie grasses vary from pretty to beautiful. They are very intriguing, and there's probably easily a dozen different species. The choice of seed, there's one place in Wisconsin that raises seed and also sells seed in Westfield. You've been past it many times on your way to Madison, and their facility is just a few miles from there. You can also get excellent consulting help from them, and you can hire the owner of it, which I have done without hiring. I've gotten a lot of questions answered, but you can hire them to also go through the details. And I think it was something like $125 an hour. But that's another option. There's another company that does the same thing in, it's across from La Crosse, I think, Prairie Moon Nursery. They're a bit bigger. Westfield, he handles about 200 species of various native plants. The other one handles 700. I buy from both. I've had total satisfaction from both of them. You want to buy from somebody who's got a background in this. You can go on the internet and say, oh, we can get you your seed for $200 or $300. Some of it won't even be native, so you just want to go to a quality place, and there's no shortage of them.
Okay, thank you. We'll probably want your information so we can get a hold of you when we get around to planting, when that happens.
One more thing about me is I opened up my prairie 3 years ago for the public to join. And I get between 50 and 100 people, adults, and I do not charge for anything. This is just see what a prairie is. Maybe you want to put native plants in. I also get 2 days in September from 2 schools. One gives me about 30 students on a morning, and the other one we get up to about 50 students, so I'm using it for education as well. It has made me one of the happiest people. My hobby has become of value. Everybody's familiar with the monarch. Who would have expected 5 years ago, if you got a farm background, that it would be in the Farm Bill? It's an important thing. You are doing this for a specific purpose, but the side effects of what that prairie trunk will be fantastic and fabulous, and it'll coordinate beautifully with, I understand they're putting one in, what's the flower place, just to Louise, near your house.
Oh, Pumpkin
Monk,
Gardens?
yes, I believe they're putting some in. The Wausau School Forest is putting some in. I've been invited, but I haven't been out there to see that yet. Prairies do even better when there's others nearby. Insects go back and forth. I don't really expect you want to talk about insects, but the monarch is one of them. In 20 years, measured 5 years ago, we lost 80% of them. From 2 years ago to this year, they've dropped another 50%. Insects are what keeps this world together. It's hard to believe, but go do some research. And we're losing insects like crazy, and as we lose insects, we're losing birds. Baby birds eat only insects except for doves and so on. It's going to be, if it goes, it's going to be fantastic. And the other thing you need to know, both the people who want this and those who might come look later, you will not get any flowers to speak of that first spring and summer. They take 3 years to become a prairie that becomes the beginnings of one. You'll get preparation you have to do that first year, mowing. You wait till they get about this big, and by that time the weeds that are there, and there will be some guaranteed, they start getting their flowers, then their seeds. You want to whack off the top of those, not the whole plant. So you wait till about like this and you mow. And in less than a month, it's going to be like this, and you mow to here. And then you do a third mowing that first year. Sometimes you even do a little bit more than that, but that's the only thing you do to it. You never go in there and say, well, we'll pull weeds. You do that, and you will pull out your plants that are going to become your prairies. Most of the prairie flowers that first year, when they're done growing, they'll be that tall. There will be some that first year that are going to show, but you're going to chop their heads off also. That sounds like awful, but it even makes that plant stronger. It takes tremendous energy to produce the petals and the seed. So it's not a bad thing, but you will not get flowers year 1. You'll get some year 2, and by 3, most will start blooming. By 5, it's going to be unbelievable. It's just beautiful.
Do they need to be watered early on, or?
That first year, if we get really, really dry times, there is an advantage if you could water it. But after that, prairies grow on hillsides. Many grow on certain plants on practically sand. You've heard the roots go down. If they go down 2 to 3 feet that first year, that's a shallow rooted prairie plant. Some are going to get to be 10, 12, 14 feet deep in the course of 5, 6 years. They've got pictures, if you go down in Iowa, of the actual prairie plant with the 16 feet of roots still attached. And they have pictures of it, of course. That's not every plant. Continue.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your background coming in. I guess we can move on to solar connections. You guys want to start? Yeah, Pat, you want to introduce who we got here and go from there?
Sure. I'm Pat Peterson. I'm a resident. I live a block from here. I live on the 500 block of Franklin. So I got involved as a resident, and late in the game, I wasn't paying attention. So on the screen, well, with me here is Aaron Benson. I'm with Matthew Construction. And Aaron Benson next to me is with Matthew Construction also, and he has also been leading our solar. We have a solar company called Solar Connection. It's based out of Rochester, Minnesota. Aaron actually worked on working with that company and developed a relationship, and now it's part of our Matthew family of companies. He's a person that I would consider, he does a lot of this, looking at commercial solar applications. On the screen, you'll see two gentlemen. The plaid shirt is Micah. Micah is, I'd call him a guru of solar, so he's very knowledgeable with different aspects of solar technology. The other person, and they're in the same office tonight, that's Chris Olofsson. He's been in solar for many years as well, so they're both with Solar Connection. We work with them every day. As I said 2 weeks ago, brought them to the table to answer your questions. We did a walk around on the site. We have pictures. We looked at your electrical service. There's a lot of, we're here to, if you have, we have a couple questions and concerns, and we're here to help you address them if you have questions for us. And I'm going to let Aaron talk about what he looked at as far as the locations. Also, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, and Eric knows this, you bought the property from us. We're very familiar with the property. We know what those mounds and hills were built prior to us owning the property, but we are very familiar with what's there. We know the lay of the land. We know where the hard rock is. We were the quarry operators for a number of years, and I'm going to simply say, just to start the conversation, is that property to the north is tough. It's rough. It's not, in my opinion, it is not a suitable place for anything to do with solar arrays or panels. Not to mention the distance away from the service that you need to serve. So with that, I'm going to let Aaron,
Yeah, let's start with, we'll start with your questions, I guess, and I don't know if we'll be able to answer them today, but we can make a list and definitely get back to you, but let's have you guys start off with what you guys came up with.
Again, my name's Aaron with Matthew and Solar Connection as well. And as Pat mentioned, we look at sites like this all the time. I just went into it with an open mind, just as though I were just doing an initial evaluation on the site. And we did drive around, look at the different areas. The area to the east looks like a beautiful spot to be able to put a potential array. The area to the north was unsuitable, in my opinion, without an extremely, costly interconnection to get back to the building. When we look at these, usually the very first thing that we do is do an analysis of utility usage and policy, and use that information to try to help dial in what's an appropriate system size. We didn't have that information ahead of time. We still don't, but that could really help identify, what type of a project you're really looking at. I know there have been several different iterations of different projects, different sizes, different locations, and I think I'm a simple guy. I just like to kind of break it all down and see what makes sense. Based off of the service size that you have, a 750 kVA transformer, you're probably looking at a 750 kilowatt AC system size that would be very simply interconnected there. But you have to have the discussion with WPS about what the substation capacity is there. My understanding is it has been upgraded, so that's a great thing. Probably a pretty good chance that that would work there, but that would be the first thing. If you want to go above the 750 kW, number one, you have to know what WPS is going to say about that. And then number two would be you would have to upgrade the transformer if you're going to go any bigger than that. So that at least gives you an idea of scope and size. So I guess my questions would be, what does the demand look like there? What does the load, the monthly load look like? Is there interval data? If there's interval data, 15-minute data, then we could really identify what does this look like from, demand reduction? How is this going to impact demand, which is important from a return on investment calculation. And it's important for the utility to understand that as well, because they have to take this power if you're not using it all on site. So I think my understanding is you're not looking to overproduce a whole bunch and basically be an electric utility out there. You're simply trying to offset cost and offset usage the best you can. So those are just a few real simple, ideas and thoughts as to try to dial in really what you're looking for scope of project there. I did very quickly just put together some, based off of some of those things, like what a megawatt system would look like there. I found some of the other work that Clark Dietz had put together earlier, which I hadn't seen that before, but now I have. But anyway, so you have some indication of that, and I think a system would fit fine in that area. You could be one other thing I did after we were out there. We use a small handheld tool. It's called a suneye to be able to identify shade and look at is this a good spot or not based on trees and other things. So we lined up behind the row of trees out there, basically even with the building, which was, we stepped off roughly 180 feet, no shade at all from those trees. So if we move forward another 30 feet, we started to get shading. We got down to in the low 90%. It's about 92% available sun at that point. Go further, we get into the upper 80%. So doesn't appear to be any impact from the trees as long as you keep it back a ways. There's plenty of room on either side, from setback standpoints. And so I guess I'll leave it there. I'd love to give you maybe more information about, other implications. If you start getting larger and going over a megawatt, there are other things to consider, such as, when you're looking at the Inflation Reduction Act gave provisions for nonprofits for tax credits. So there's a 30% credit there. Systems under a megawatt are exempt from things such as prevailing wage and apprenticeship things, requirements. So again, just different talking points based on system size, but you really have to start with looking at the load, what you're using for power, figuring out what makes the most sense from a size, and then going from there.
All right, thank you. I guess we'll open up questions from us to them. I got quite a list. You guys mentioned that you're putting a 1 megawatt unit in over by Marshfield or somewhere. Do you know how many acres that was? If you're willing to share that.
That's 6 acres,
It's six,
about 6.
about 6. Okay. I'm just trying to compare what we have available to what you guys are seeing a megawatt actually fit on in the area.
There are a variety of different ways those can be set up, but that particular one, that's about the size of that lot.
Okay. And then we've had conversations about tracking panels versus stationary panels. I guess thoughts on pros and cons of stationary versus tracking. I guess I'm assuming size is footprint. With the tracking ones, you probably get better sun, so you probably get smaller footprint for more energy. Maintenance, I mean, what are you guys seeing for maintenance on tracking versus stationary?
Yeah, if I may, there's the tracking, there's dual axis tracking, there's single axis tracking, of course, fixed. And I noticed that all three of those were questions from Pat's notes in the previous meeting. Dual axis tracking isn't done a whole lot anymore, at least on the big stuff. I've worked on several of those, and they always have issues. Following the sun in a dual axis tracker in our climate, especially in the winter, is very, very difficult. So every single one I've worked on has had issues and maintenance issues and difficulty, and you're out resetting them twice a year to get them to work. And so I really recommend against that. I would say the amount of extra energy is not worth it. Single axis trackers, the models say they'll produce 11% more energy. I think the models are off on that. Well, from experience, I can tell you the models are a little bit overly optimistic on that. I think you're looking at around 6% more. It depends a little bit on how dense you put them, of course, and how much one row shades the next row. But what I've seen out there, 6-7% extra energy is what you're producing. I would definitely plan on double the maintenance costs if you're budgeting out. I usually like to think on a situation like this, a good maintenance number that I like to use is 3%. 3% of the system costs I'm going to budget for maintenance, and then I'm going to be happy that most years I don't use that much. And I have that money available for other things. But then in the year that I do need to use that, I've got it. On a tracking system, I usually, again, as a general guide, I like to think 6%, and again, happy that most years I don't use that, but then the other years I know I've got it. And if I may, as long as I got the floor, the other conversation, I like to echo Aaron's, encouragement to talk to the utility. That's something you definitely want to bring them on in the conversation early. There's only those wires that come to your facility are only so big. They have a capacity. Obviously, the transformer has a capacity. You want to just make sure that you're not putting out a RFP in the future that can't be fulfilled once it's awarded. So that's a conversation to definitely have early. Maybe you already have, but if you haven't, I'd encourage you to bring them into the conversation early. The other conversation along the same lines is the zoning folks. Make sure you're having the conversation with the zoning folks. I noticed that very, very few, currently the property, according to the Wausau official zoning map, is currently zoned residential. I don't think that the Wausau official zoning map is up to date because I don't think you're residential there, but I don't know. That's the map that's published anyway. And of course, a large solar energy system wouldn't be allowed there, but there's only 3 zoning districts in Wausau that will allow a large solar energy system. So you just want to make sure that you're the large industrial or the extraction or the rural holding zoning districts. Again, you don't want to get to the end of your RFP process and then find out the array can't be built. And then the other thing is in your zoning ordinance, it does say on these large systems that clearing of vegetation is only allowed as necessary. And so depending on the size on that lot, if some of those trees needed to be cleared, well, a contractor wouldn't be able to probably come in and ask the zoning people to do that, whereas you folks might be able to have that conversation ahead of time and get that, you folks would be better suited to have that conversation than a contractor would. So again, if you're thinking of pushing that tree line back a little to fit a few extra panels, you just want to have that conversation with them early, make sure that you're approved to do some things like that. And then the other thing is that on these large solar energy systems, the Wausau zoning requires all electrical connections to be either underground or in a building. So you're just going to, again, in your planning purposes, you don't want to fill up every square inch with panels. You want to make sure there's room for some buildings to house some equipment and things like that, just to make sure you're complying with those zoning folks. There was also a question in the notes, if I may, there's also a question in the notes about panels that absorb light from both sides. Yes, those exist. Yes, they absorb a little bit of light from the reflection off the snow or whatever. Is it a lot? No. Is it something that you want to be spending a lot of time really trying to go after that? No. They're great panels. They're fine. They will produce a little bit extra. They're not going to produce enough to make you, you're not going to retire next year off that extra production. So just keep that in mind. And then finished height was something that was a question mark. It depends a little bit on your ground cover, right? If your ground cover is 3 feet versus 2 feet or 4 feet versus 3 feet is going to depend a little bit. But a fixed array, a good just kind of general guide, fixed height when you're done will be somewhere around 12 feet, plus or minus a little bit depending on some of these other variables. And then on a tracker system, there's a couple of different systems out there. If you are concerned about height, there are systems that don't go as high. I would think you'd be in the 7 or 8 foot range on those. And then there's systems that do go higher where they have 2 panels that are in the single axis tracker. You could be talking as high as 18 feet on those, depending on what you're looking at for berms. That might influence which tracker system you go with.
All right, the height was definitely, am I on? The height was on my list of questions too, so thanks for covering that.
I had wondered about the bifacial panels as well.
You-
So
you want-
I also wondered about the use of the bifacial panel, so thank you for speaking to that.
One thing to add on that with the bifacial panels is that pretty much all of the big manufacturers have gone that direction. So unless you wanted to pull some panels from old inventory, you're going to be using bifacial panels. Micah's comment is more, don't get your hopes up on what the additional output you're going to get out of them is relative to a traditional module. We have several systems in La Crosse that we are monitoring now where there's traditional monofacial panels on one building, and 2 blocks over there's a similar system with bifacials. We haven't seen any notable increase with the bifacial modules yet. Now, those are flat roof projects where there is very little reflection, but it's something that don't trust the manufacturer that says you're going to get 15% more out of my panel compared to the other guys. That's a marketing tactic that's not based in fact. So.
And I guess on these systems, rough size, I guess it probably depends on manufacturer, but rough size of panels, like I assume they're not bigger than a sheet of plywood or anything like that. Maybe just touch on that a little bit.
That's certainly the way it used to be. There used to be 2 standard sizes of solar panels, 60 cell and 72 cell, which made our lives very, very easy. Nowadays, it is all over the place. There are panels that are over 8 feet long and almost 4 feet wide. The biggest panels that I've seen that are commercially available are in the 650 watt range, which are huge. You're talking about 2-person carry, 80 to 90 pounds. They have gotten massive. Most of the panels that we typically are installing are right around that, 3.5 feet by 7.5 feet. That would be a 500 or a 550 watt panel, but the day will come when somebody has a 700 watt or even a 1 kilowatt panel, but that thing is going to be so big you're going to need a crane to move it around. So that's one direction that these manufacturers have chosen to go. Panel A, Panel B, and Panel C all have the same efficiency because the technology is the same. So how do you look better than the other guy? You just make yours bigger and say that it's better. So again, that's very site specific. There are certain sizes of panels that certain racking companies and racking systems can support, and there are some that they can't support. So that'll be something that will be addressed way down the line of what pairings make the most sense. Is it fixed tilt? Is it tracking? What is our max height limitations? That's what we do when we have an RFP or we have an interested customer, is we fill in all of those unanswered questions to get a design that meets the spec. So,
John, just a second, John. Pat, go ahead. You got something to add?
I was wondering, Mike and Chris, if you could kind of mention something about if they use the north property and say it's 1,000 feet away, what's involved with pulling that much power back 1,000 feet? I mean, there's options of adding a transformer and carrying a different, so I don't know this stuff, I just know enough to ask the question. Can you kind of give the pros and cons of being that far away?
Sure. So carrying power when we're talking about relatively low voltages, not the 13,008 that the distribution system managed by WPS has, is one of those things that it's not in terms of cost, it's not a linear equation. You go an extra 10 feet, you're going to pay $10 more. Every foot that you go further away from where that power is generated adds an exponential amount of cost, right? So the first 100 feet, it may be $10 a foot. The next 100 feet may be $12 a foot. Then you get to a certain threshold. If we're going further than 500, it may shoot up to $40 a foot. So there's a kind of a barrier or a limitation there, just because of the fundamentals of electricity and voltage, that the further away you go from where you generate something, the harder it is and the more costly it is to get it to where you're actually going to use it. So on a smaller scale, for a typical system we would do for like a farmer that's single phase, 40 kilowatts or something, we really try our best to keep that within 500 feet of the meter. If we have to go further than 500 feet, the wire size gets bigger, we have to switch from aluminum to copper. We may have to pull parallel sets, so we're talking multiple runs of really large wire, and the cost just adds up so exponentially that you really want to locate it as close to that service as possible. If you're talking about a distributed system like this, where you're actually going to produce power and you're going to self-consume it at the facility. If this was a community solar garden or a solar farm, so to speak, where the utility was going to put a meter out at a pole and you were just going to sell power back to the grid, that'd be a whole different story. In this case, because we're going to have self-consumption at the facility, it is in everybody's best interest, ourselves and you folks included, to have it as close to that electric meter as possible, because the size of the wires of this thing are already going to be big, and keeping that distance as short as you can definitely from a financial perspective makes a lot of sense. Anything is possible, but it will be painful if we're talking about going 1,000 feet with this much power. And that's just, there's no way around that. We haven't perfected Wi-Fi transmission just yet. We're getting there.
Go ahead, John.
So I've got a series of questions, some based on your comments. So what is the threshold for the tax credits? Is it a megawatt system for local governments, or are there various options if you're above or below?
The tax credits are available regardless of the size.
Okay.
So it's not that. It's just, there's other things that kick in once you go above 1 megawatt.
So what are those other things?
It's the prevailing wage rates.
Okay, so it's the requirements
Yep.
in the administrative accounting and
Yep,
cost.
the accounting of all of that, correct. And then an apprenticeship program, that's part of that as well, so.
And then,
And domestic content comes into play for projects in 2024 and then increases for 2025.
You could use that.
Yeah, put your mic on, thanks.
So also
That's true.
domestic content comes into play on the materials in 2024 over a meg.
Correct. Currently there is adders for domestic content. A lot of people ask about that. Can we get it? There's an extra 10%. I guess the short answer is not yet. And if you do go above 1 meg, you have to have those domestic content. I mean, and it's going to keep ratcheting up.
Yeah, and it goes, and then it's penalty, so it goes
Right.
to 90% if you don't meet the domestic content. And then in 2025, I think it goes to 85% of the 30%. So there's like a penalty against the 30%. If you go above a meg, if you're under a meg, I don't think it applies.
Then you're exempt from that, correct. You just wouldn't be eligible for the extra 10% unless you were able to meet that threshold, which continues to increase as the percentage of the system cost, so.
So that raises another question relative to timing. So as you look at, I think we're all struggling with trying to understand how the Fed's requirements work. So are there incentives for doing it quicker or disincentives for waiting? So if you do the project in 2024 versus 2025 versus 2026, are there differences relative to the credits that would apply to the project?
Aaron, I'll chip in here. So just to be the bearer of bad news, which is often the role that I get around here, 2024 is not on the table. If you find somebody that's able to do a project like this with that short a time frame, don't hire them, because anybody good is booked out at least a year because of the Inflation Reduction Act and all the other incentives. This is possible to be a 2025 completion. I would probably pencil in it not being turned on until 2026 at this point.
Right, but that's from a supply side. Are there any tax or credit consequences for delaying that you're aware of?
So the big one is that domestic content, and if a project begins in the year 2025, in order to meet that domestic content, you have to have 55% of the equipment manufactured in the United States. Currently, that is not possible with the products that are available on the market, specifically the cells that are inside of all the solar panels. If you don't have cells that are made here in the US, you can't even get to 40% right now, which is why there's only one company that's able to take advantage of that domestic content adder the way it is now. First Solar is the name of that company. They are the only company that makes solar cells here in the United States. Over time, there has been a lot of commitments from large solar module manufacturers to bring that manufacturing to the United States. I could go through the names of companies that have committed to operating here in the US to take advantage of that, but none of those facilities are online yet. It will be at least a year, more than likely 2, before we actually have access to that product where we can confidently give you, good advice as to that you're going to qualify for that domestic content. By the time you get up to 2025 and you have to have 55%, at that point you're talking about some of the inverter systems that convert the direct current to alternating current. Nobody makes those in the United States right now, not one company. So that Inflation Reduction Act and the way they have it phased in is designed to bring that manufacturing back, but that takes time. And if this is a project that needs that extra 10% or whatever the case may be, your only option really is to wait because it's just not ready yet.
And then from a perspective of timing, you've got the traditional approach of somebody develops the specs and you bid it. Are there design build type approaches that might expedite the process? And are there pluses and minuses associated with the traditional bid versus design build?
I would say design build is much faster and more efficient. We're going to get to a usable, realistic system size and components a lot faster than if you put it out for public bid and have to filter through 20 different companies' ideas of how to get this project done. So that would certainly expedite things, but in all reality, a project of this size is going to take a minimum. Everything happens perfectly and there's no holdups and no issues that arise. You're talking 9 to 12 months just to get utility approval. That's just the way it's going to be. After that, once the utility tells us exactly what they want to see and what equipment they want us to use and how we're going to hook it up, we may be looking at 50-week lead times on that electrical equipment because the supply chain there is still not quite recovered. And that breaker that we need or that switch gear that we need may be 50 weeks out. So you put those two things together, you could be talking about 2 years and there's absolutely nothing anybody can do about that.
So one of the concerns that we have, and I represent the commission on this body, is that how do we fund this from a perspective of we're not looking at rate increases? And have you, based on your experience, have any other projects capitalized the startup costs to a point where basically you're lumping that in and you're doing, in essence, a revenue bond once the system is in place to pay off those costs? And what has been the success, or how have they been financed?
Aaron, you could probably answer that best.
So I didn't catch the entirety of the question, I
So
guess.
the question is, as we approach it, as the utility and the city look at it, the options are to bring in money up front, and given the cash flow of the utility, there's limited dollars. So is there a way to basically capitalize those startup costs to a point where you can then, at the point that it's turned on, try to recover those upfront costs and those operational costs, basically through revenues? How have other entities looked at that? How big of a commitment are we looking at needing to make up front versus can we capitalize those costs and spread it over the life of the project if we're looking at a 7 to 10 year ROI?
Sure. So any company that's going to do this, they're going to require some money up front, basically to lock in a commitment. And that's going to basically get you going and getting through the gauntlet of permitting and interconnection and all of that. Then at that point, once construction is going to start, there's going to have to be some money exchanged at that point. So at that point, you could go through bonding and raise money that way. And it's something that we don't normally get involved with. But at some point, at that point, before construction starts, there's going to have to be, the contractor's going to have to get a payment at that time. And whether that's done through capital reserves or through bonding, that's really not, in our wheelhouse as to how that is best going to work. As far as, not making any payments until you're, it's online and producing and saving, I guess I can't really answer that as to what your best options are.
Be the best for the utility, maybe not for you, but, so what, from the time of contracting, and you started to allude to it, and from the signing of the contract to generation of power, typically what type of time frame? I know some of it's dependent upon size and other factors, but is there, if we say a year, 18 months, 2 years, again, we're looking at it from the perspective of cash flow, return on investment and other things. What would be, if you had to give us a realistic number, and if you could answer this too when you address it, what would that be? From contract to generation.
So if we were, let's just live in a hypothetical world here, if we were to have a signed contract for a known system size and location and all of those details today, I would say best case scenario, we would be starting construction 1 year from now. And completing construction, getting final inspections and all the approvals and everything else would probably be 4 to 6 months after that. And then at that point, it could be, 2 weeks for the utility to come and energize it and put the meters in. It could be 2 months. It honestly, I hate to be a pessimist, but it could be 2 years. We literally today turned on some systems up in the St. Cloud area that we installed over a year ago because the utility needed to make upgrades, and it took them that long to make those upgrades. So we are very honest with our customers about what to expect, and the unfortunate nature of that is so much of this is out of our control or your control that it could be best case 1.5 years. It could be 3 years before you're producing power. It's hard to tell this early in the game. The other thing that is relevant to the conversation, and I alluded to it earlier, with the incentives and Inflation Reduction Act and tax credits and all this stuff that's going on, every day that you wait adds weeks to when you're actually going to get on the schedule. Everybody that's reputable, that's been doing this type of work for the last 13 years like we have, is really, really busy. And we always do our best to do projects in order of contract signing to be just as fair to our small residential customer in Rochester as we would be to the city of Wausau. And so every day counts if it's imperative to have it turned on by a certain date. If it's not imperative to have a go live date, and you want to play this, kind of the long game and just trickle along and not make firm commitments and just see where it goes, that's fine. But every day that we wait on executing something adds weeks, if not months, to when you might have a system go live. And that's across the board, whether you're looking for 8 panels on your house or if you're looking for a megawatt for a water treatment plant.
So I agree, 2 years at the soonest is probably what you could be looking at. There's a couple things that I mean, why don't you go through your questions first? And then there's a couple things I think we need to talk about in terms of what happens here in Wisconsin that are a little bit unique as well.
Do you have more questions, John, or?
Not right now.
Okay.
So a number of times the phrase RFP was used here, and I know that the city uses the term RFP, and it's not necessarily the same thing that the city is used to. So it's a request for proposals when you call that for engineering services. It's a little bit different than what they're talking about here. It's a request for proposal to do the entire project, essentially. It's comparable to when you put a project out for bids as a city under your delivery. However, it's a little bit closer to a design build than any of the rest of the projects you do. So when you put out a street project with utilities under the street, you basically say they shall be this size, this material, here's your schedule, what are your qualifications, here's the bonding that's required. The city or an engineer oversees the project, and the contractors know exactly what they're bidding on with unit prices. In this case, very typically, what we generally do in playing a role in a project like this is the engineering component has more to do with what was mentioned in terms of site readiness, zoning approvals, survey, and a number of those things have already been looked at. There have been some conversations with Wisconsin Public Service, but those are a bit dated. I mean, this has been going on for a number of years. There are some rules related to the 1 megawatt system that we should probably introduce Sam at some point as well in terms of what he can offer here and helping on the more planning design side. When you design, so to speak, in the engineering part of it, it's to look at the electrical connections, the interconnect, the civil engineering, the drainage, working with someone who specializes in prairies, if you prefer a prairie as your landscaping, and putting some specifications together that contractors can bid on. The photovoltaic part of this, like the meat and potatoes of the solar that these guys were talking about, there's a lot of options for materials. And as also they mentioned, the supply chain is all over the place. And you'd put out something that looks more like a performance spec. Maybe not the best term for it, but it relates to something like what you do here for public infrastructure. Let's say you have irrigation on one of your projects. For the most part, someone doesn't design where all of the lines go and you must use this head and it's this spacing. You put that out and a contractor generally says, here's what I'm going to provide for you to get, to meet your irrigation needs, right? And then you would review that and make sure it performs as it should. So this is a little bit closer to that. And the reason that in our municipal climate, for lack of a better term, that there's some work that gets done on the front end is because this is public infrastructure and you're required to bid it. So even putting a performance spec out, it would meet that, and then you have some latitude in the materials you pick, rather than someone who's an electrical engineer, and I'm not, I'm a civil engineer. But we have a team of electrical engineers. So to say you must use this inverter in this location and or equal, there will always be someone who says, I have this or equal. Because the pace of this market is also so fast that it's a better approach to put out an RFP and invite contractors to propose on that. Which, again, in your world, in the municipal world, that's similar to a bid, and it meets your requirements. So, just trying to get us all on the same page in terms of terminology, because there's some overlap. We should probably also talk about, John, you had some questions about producing power and when you can do that and who's allowed to do that. So I'd like to introduce Sam. So Sam is with QSTN. And we've enlisted his help over the years. I think you've seen, we worked with Sunvest a little bit. Sunvest has sort of changed their business model to some degree. They have focused very much on building these systems, and design build is a very popular approach to this. Again, it's a little bit different because you're a municipality. Sam's company does something a little bit different than that. So if you could kind of maybe explain a little bit what you do and why we're
Yeah, sure.
teamed up
So,
doing this.
my name's Sam Miller. I work for QSTN. We're a sustainability company. We mostly work in energy. We do a lot of energy consulting. We do energy modeling. We do some project development and implementation, but mostly we're a solar consultant. And when we do turnkey implementation, we do so through a group of partners. So we do a lot of this type of work, assessment, planning, conceptual designs. In the last 12 months, we've done hundreds of public buildings. We're doing lots and lots of public schools in Illinois, where we're doing site assessment, conceptual design, and feasibility and potential. We're doing similar type of work for a number of different cities. We just got started on some of the work, considering the different options at the water treatment facility. I think that I agree with most of the discussion here. I would say, in our experience, a best case scenario of a year and a half out is, I think that's conservative. Like, best case, I would maybe push to, you can maybe get a year, closer to a year from signed contract to build and energized. Year and a half to 3 years, depending on a lot of details, it could very well be that. But I would push for a little more optimistic if we're going to call it best case. I'm not sure. In terms of system size, there's been work done on the existing equipment there that we've been working towards an assumption of a 1 megawatt system that current infrastructure can handle. Also on the WPS interconnect agreement, in order to allow for net metering credits, their cutoff is 1 meg. So to go larger than that, you wouldn't have any net metering credit if you are exporting back to the grid. We've been looking basically to maximize the offset at the 1 meg size limit. And I think that's very possible today, given the current consumption, based on what we've put together so far, which really isn't done. We have been talking a little bit about the existing operation and where it's running relative to future capacities and how that scenario looks. Just based on some of the preliminary numbers, I think we'll be pressed to have a full 100% offset of current consumption where it is today at the 1 meg system. So as capacity or electricity consumption increases over the years with additional capacity, the system offset would, decline over the years relative to the generation increase. I think some of the discussion about fixed versus a tracking system and overall height limitations, it would be good to have that conversation to get input from the city as to what our design preferences, because there are a bunch of different options. The fixed array, we may actually be able to implement that on a smaller footprint relative to the single access tracker, where the row spacing, you would want a little larger actually, so that you minimize shading. And I know that kind of footprint has been a concern. And also single access tracking, you have moving parts. Both are definitely viable. If there is a preference, one or the other, like that would be good to design around those types of preferences and hear more from the city on, where you're landing or where you're headed on some of those things. Yeah, I think I'll stop there for now.
All right, thanks.
Can
And,
I ask a question, Chad?
Yeah, go ahead.
Of Sam, and I'm going to say this is more Sam and Micah. Is that 750 KVA, is that a pinch point currently for a 1 megawatt system?
The main transformer coming
Main
in
transformer.
to the water plant.
Yeah, not that I'm aware, but that was the design assumption we were handed. Yeah, so can look further into that, but I don't have a better answer for you tonight.
Yeah, so Lisa looked at that, our electrical team lead. So our electrical team lead, Lisa, who I think you've seen here before, did look at that, and well, we call it 1 megawatt, so all of us need to be just under that, right? Because that's our limitation. And that was the other limitation for the 1 megawatt, was the equipment at the front of the plant, not interconnecting with WPS. However, that needs to be revisited, getting into design to make sure WPS facilities are adequate, and they're involved in the discussion once design moves forward, so.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? John, go
A
ahead.
question for CM, the question that they addressed relative to the various locational options. Have you taken a look at it from a geotechnical perspective and spacing, and are you in agreement with the comments that were made by?
Yeah, I mean,
made-
total agreement from point of interconnection and running wire and trenching and the associated complications and added cost. I mean, we typically say solar is almost technically feasible everywhere. It's a matter of cost, right? So like, it's feasible to do up in those northern areas or options. And if that's your only option, then yeah, there's a viable solution that we could come up with, and it's just a matter of cost, and then pushes the payback out further. But we were basically working off the assumption that those 4 different area options were still of interest. Otherwise, I mean, to just walk in the room and look at the site, it would be obvious, like, that you would pick that front area just to the east would be a no-brainer, if not for other, considerations about location.
Pat, do you have anything to add from a geotechnical perspective, being that I'm positive we've done many studies at this property over the years of what's there? I know you mentioned it earlier, but when Pat says it's a tough site to the north, he means it. He knows this stuff inside and out.
Well, I like Tanya, our specialties, we're civil engineers. And I'm familiar with that property. Now, you're talking about clearing the hillside, coming from the upper side, clearing the trees out, and the landing area from the top of that hill that the city owns down into the old fill area, it's not a big area. that, there's a lot of, ravine?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big ravine down below that, and it doesn't give you nearly the acreage that you need as a good working space. It's, and what's ever buried into that hill, I think Eric may know that, I don't know that. I just know it's ugly,
Jimmy Hoffa.
so.
Yeah, we didn't find any dead gangsters, mobsters. However, some years ago, in lieu of doing a full professional geotechnical investigation, the city water department did some backhoe test pits. And there was a lot of things like old culverts, concrete and asphalt, rebar in the asphalt, other just random things. Less organic stuff buried. It may just be because some of it's gone, but we didn't get into the big stockpiles that are out there that are not aggregate or something usable. We just avoided those areas. So there's a lot of undesirable stuff, and we saw a test pit hole worth, right? I mean, we did plenty of them, but it didn't expose everything underground. So there's, maybe someone in there with some concrete shoes. I don't know, but.
Okay.
And I guess one final comment on
Yeah.
that is,
Yep.
terrain is important. I mean, putting solar in a gently sloping field is fine, even a rolling field is fine, but when you're talking the severe slope of going up into those trees, down into the ravine, up over the mound of who knows what's in there, that is not user-friendly for a solar array system and the racking that's required, because you're creating your own shadows going up and down. So it's just not user-friendly, that's my opinions.
Okay. Thank you. Are we good otherwise, Paul, John? Good? All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your time. We have another agenda item to schedule the next meeting. I don't know if you guys want to stick around and find out when that is, but we'll move on to the next agenda item. My iPad did an update, so I can't get into it. I believe it was discussion for the next meeting time, though. Yep. So I guess Tanya, Sam, to have some more detailed, how much longer would you guys need? 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
We plan on having it finished at the end of next week, under the assumption we thought this meeting would only be the third week of the month. So we started on it, it's just not finished. Oh, gosh, sorry. I'm used to being a superstar with the microphone. So,
So you're under the understanding third week, and that's typically what we have been doing?
yeah.
Okay,
So we were prepared to have something to be ready for that meeting.
okay.
I think, in light of what was talked about today, we just want to verify you would still like all 4 locations explored. I mean, you don't have to answer that right now, but.
Yeah, we can,
Before we get too far in the weeds, probably.
yep. I'll be out the end of that week. Could we push it to the last week of March?
That's spring break for most of the schools,
Okay.
I guess.
All right,
I don't have children, but I've been told that's a pretty rough week. But, I mean, if there's an option maybe for video,
Well, what about, so I'm going to be around the first part of that week, so we could do Tuesday or Wednesday, the 19th or the 20th?
okay, so that's fine.
You won't?
You're not here, Eric?
How about, well, spring
I mean,
break.
we can
spring
do the
break-
last week.
Spring break aside, let's say 27th, or Wednesday's okay? I mean,
Can you video in or do you? Okay.
we'll say the 27th at 5 for now and work around there.
We'll have the material ready. It
Okay.
just might not be Sam presenting. He's gonna be in a plane.
Okay. All right, so we'll plan on the 27th at 5 PM. All right, and then move on to the last agenda item, adjournment. Motion by Paul, second by John. All those in favor, say aye. Aye, all right, we're stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Sure.